Hello and welcome back to this safe and wonderful world of Bioshock, or at least we're just talking about it today. I finished my run a couple of weeks ago now, and I took some time to write some notes. You can see how horrific my writing is, it's pretty bad. But I'm gonna go through just some of my thoughts on the game, and Bioshock, maybe more than most other games, kind of just has its thesis statement right there at the front. You get in the bathysphere and it literally just plays you a video that is essentially the entire thesis of the game. I'll play that here just in its full entirety so that you can hear what it has to say, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture. City where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well.
So I think there's some funny things in here. I mean, one of them right off the top is that the place is called Rapture and it's underwater, which I think is kind of an allusion to the fact that this experiment was doomed from the start. I mean, Rapture is essentially this idea that God is going to come down at some point, scoop up all the good people and take them to heaven with him. And what's funny about that is that, so one of the quoted Bible verses that is sort of used to support this idea of rapture is Thessalonians 4:17, where it talks about how they will get caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. I have to think that's intentional. This idea that somebody wanted to create rapture, but they did it in the exact opposite way of which somebody that believed in rapture would actually seek to do it. Like, you've chosen such a dumb name for your underwater city. They go on later to Bioshock Infinite, where they've built this whole city in the air, which to me doesn't really feel like a coincidence. You know, it's like they got it right this time, so to speak, and they realized their mistake, and instead of sinking the city, if they actually wanted to create Rapture to get closer to like the perfect society to heaven, you gotta go up. You gotta go into the air. The other interesting thing about this thesis statement is that it talks about specifically artists not being afraid of censors, scientists not being afraid of morality, and the great not being afraid of the small. You kind of see every single one of these come to pass in a negative way, right? One of the first boss fights is against the scientist that does all of the plastic surgery, who is, you know, unbound by morality and obviously still isn't happy, is just never satisfied with their work. Does some pretty gruesome, horrific stuff. It's certainly not a prime example of a bastion of scientific integrity or good things happening. The whole place is a complete mess. The plasmids and people crawling upside down on the ceilings, whatever, Adam, Eve, all of that stuff, you know, science run amok. Then there's Sandra Cohen, who's the artist, and that's kind of a similar idea, right? If you're an artist and with no limitations whatsoever, you can do whatever you want. That opens the door to a lot of really awful stuff that really awful people want to do. It's not to say that any artist with unlimited funds and unlimited access would become this serial killer, but it allows people that want to do that. And there's no force to check them, right? Just do whatever you want. And if that means murdering people for art projects, then fine. And obviously, if that's going to be a core tenet of your society, you're going to run into a lot of problems. And then they talk about the great not being worried about the small, and I think that's pretty literally played out in the way that Fontaine dies at the end there. You have this huge, muscular, you know, guy that's been sucking up all of the atom, all of the power in the city for his own gain, and he's toppled by a group of little sisters, which, you know, can fairly easily track to big governments being toppled by protests, things like that. It's, you know, the small band together and destroy this person trying to exert all of this power over them. It's showing this idea of, you know, the ability to act as a collective and affect change greater than, you know, one individual would be able to. I guess that brings me to the point. I actually touched on this in the run very briefly, but I didn't say it super eloquently because I was in the middle of being shot in the face probably. I think there's a very, very deliberate isolation in this game, and I think that that runs through the same through line. Not having any kind of debt to society, just, you know, being an island of a human being. This game really tries to reinforce that by never allowing you to share a space with somebody that doesn't want you dead. Anytime you think you're gonna meet a friend, you're robbed of that interaction, right? The whole beginning, Atlas is saying, I'll meet you here, you'll never meet them. There's a point where you go to get the antidote for the trees, and the woman's on the other side of the glass, and you think you're gonna go in there and see a friend who's gonna be happy to see you. She dies. It just happens again and again. I would go as far to say that there is never like a friendly or loving interaction between your character and any other character in the game, except for if you choose to save little sisters, which is, I think, part of the reason you get such a hard binary ending, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. Speaking on the little sisters, I think choosing whether or not to harvest or rescue them was bizarrely kind of a defining moment for me recording this YouTube channel, because a lot of gaming YouTubers have this idea of like, oh, I'm the bad guy and I do bad things and it's funny, and then there's people that are like, oh, I always do the good thing or whatever, I'm a nice sweetie pie. And I think you can actually see me kind of pondering this before I hit rescue, where I'm thinking, what do I want to be like known for, right? Am I going to be this like brutal person that's just going to do whatever they have to do or do the funny thing and make a joke out of it? Or am I just going to play it the way I might actually play it? Perhaps I'm getting too deep here, but you know, I think I've always been really open and honest when I talk about things on here, so I guess I figured, why would I, you know, put on some act of doing hilarious bad guy stuff for no reason. Hard mode aside, combat is super, super fun. I like a lot of the combinations you can do. I like that there's a lot of different options in ammo, anti-personnel, anti-armor, stuff like that, that you can really optimize to help you move through the game better. If I have any knock against it, I would say I never really felt any need to experiment. Even on hard mode, when I was really, really low on ammo, there was a ton of stuff I just never touched because it seemed useless, like liquid nitrogen or even things like the crossbow. It really only found use for me in the final fight. Otherwise, it just seemed too slow to be able to deal with any of the enemies. Along that same line, I think there's some clunky narrative design here. The way that they tell it over the radios can kind of be an issue sometimes because the game doesn't really stop for that conversation. There were a lot of points where I was missing some key intel because there was a splicer killing me while someone was talking over the radio and I just couldn't hear it. You didn't see it in the video. There was a significant portion cut out where I did not know that I had to go and become a big daddy because I was fighting and dying while I was receiving that information over the radio. That being said, I think the aesthetic and the palettes and the architecture in general really, really serve this super, super well. By and large, you can get the idea of the story just from that like opening thesis and seeing how the world has destroyed itself around you. It's hard to separate, you know, is this because they're trying to make a challenging game, or is this a philosophical statement of the world, or both? But there's times like when I broke the window to pull out a first aid kit, like, yeah, I was stealing that. But in theory, if you lived in this world, if you were near death and you needed first aid and you break a window, does that just mean a security robot's gonna show up and fill you full of bullets? Like, there's no gray area, right? It's just like, what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine, and that is it. It does not matter what happens to you. I'm only looking out for me, right? That's like the whole philosophy of the game summed up, even in something so small as like how you get health and how you are treated by security robots. So I think that brings us to like the big twist. I think that's a lot of fun and honestly should probably have just been the end of the game somehow. A really good turn on its head of like what you think you know of the game, and it's interesting how the world changes around you as you kind of get freed from the mind control or from the lying. You know, the foreshadowing from Andrew Ryan just sounds like all of this mad rambling that's coming from this guy that runs this huge, bizarre underwater city, but then it turns out that he knows more than you do, right? He's actually kind of poking at you and hinting at it because he knows why you're here. He knows who made you. I think maybe something that lessens the impact of it is that both Andrew Ryan and Fontaine are just kind of garbage dudes, so regardless of who I was working for or against, having both of them kind of meet their downfall works perfectly fine for me, so it's not like some horrible loss that I ended up killing Andrew Ryan and then have to go and kill Fontaine, right? Like, they probably both needed to go anyways. So ultimately it's maybe a little inconsequential, but you know, it is still like a really powerful moment when you see that big board. And obviously the would you kindly bit when you're just hitting them with the golf club is like very visceral and and pretty horrifying. Then that brings us to the actual ending of the game, which is garbage. Really bad. I don't know, like, it's, the fight is fun. I will say the Fontaine fight was really fun. It was a little less challenging than I thought it would be, given how much trouble I had with the rest of the game. If you haven't seen it, if you go on YouTube, there's 3 endings, but there's basically only 2. If you harvest even one little sister, the ending of the game that you get is you take over the entire world and nuke the population of Earth. So your choice is between, would you like to nuke the entire population of the Earth, or send the little sisters to college? One side is like way too cutesy and perfect, and the other side is like way too extreme. It's kind of a surprise given how carefully crafted, I would say, the rest of the world is. If you killed one single little sister while under the effects of mind control, being told to do so by somebody else who is mind controlling you, then you are just like the evilest person alive, and you will destroy the entire Earth. I mean, you get essentially a 45-second slideshow that shows you this stuff play out. You beat the boss, now here's a PowerPoint presentation that'll tell you whether or not you're like the worst person that's ever walked the face of the earth, or if you sent all of these nice little girls to college for free. At the end of the day, at the end of the run, it's a really, really good game. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and obviously it is far better than most in terms of game stories and how they're portrayed. I think it does a really good job of showing and not telling, and it's obviously really thought out, its sort of philosophical stance and its philosophical message, and it conveys that through all aspects of the gameplay, right? The architecture, the way you interact with the world, both the text and the subtext really line up in a way that is, advanced for the average game, I would say. When it's all said and done, did I have fun playing it? I did, a lot. So thank you so much for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for tuning in for the whole run. I really like having, kind of a tough challenge constantly going on this channel, so I think soon we're going to start with a new game. And if you've watched this far into the video, I'll reward you by saying that right now, I think we're going to at least try to do Celeste all berries. All A-sides, all berries, I guess. We're at least going to give it a try. As of now, Oops, All Berries is going to be the next full playthrough on this channel. But again, we'll see how that pans out. It might be way beyond my skill level. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'd love to hear what you thought of the game whenever you played it, whether you just watched it for the first time with me playing it, or if you played it 13 years ago when it came out. If you liked this, I post every other day, so if you come back, not tomorrow, but the day after that, there will be another fun video for you to check out. I appreciate you stopping by, but I've got nothing else for you today, so just remember that you gotta send those little sisters to college.